50 years after contact with the English, it became clear to one American Indian that if his people were to survive, they would have to drive the colonists out of New England. That man was Metacom, a Wampanoag leader, known as King Philip to the Puritan colonists. Since the founding of Jamestown in 1607, the peace between English colonists and the coastal Indian nations from Virginia to Massachusetts was fragile. The greatest trouble between the two groups was land. The American Indian nations did not understand the English concept of land ownership, which meant a person owned the land and it was not available to anyone else. This misunderstanding inevitably led to conflict. The first major conflict to occur was between the Powhatan Confederacy and Virginia's Jamestown settlers in 1622. Nearly a third of the Jamestown colonists, 327 settlers, were killed. Only the colonists' firearms kept them from being pushed into the sea. In 1636, another war broke out, this time in New England, and was known as the Pequot War. When Indians from a different tribe killed an English trader, the Puritans raided Pequot villages. Defending themselves, the Pequots attacked the settlers. In a move which would define warfare against the Indian nations for the next 2 centuries and prove decisive in defeating them, the Puritans made an alliance with the Pequot's traditional enemies, the Narragansett. In May, colonists and the Narragansett warriors attacked and set fire to a Pequot village on the Mystic River. Hundreds of Pequot were burned alive or killed trying to escape. The strength of the Pequots was broken and the war ended. These 2 wars, while bloody, did not decide who would control the coastal regions. The final war, which would decisively hand control of the Atlantic coast to the colonists, occurred in 1675 and was called King Philip's War. The peace following the Pequot War held for another 40 years. In that time, a new leader, Metacom, emerged among the Puritans' traditional allies, the Wampanoag Confederacy. Metacom became chief when his older brother, Wamsutta, died suddenly in Plymouth while negotiating with colonists. From this moment on, Metacom openly distrusted the Puritans and everything they did. Tensions between the Wampanoag Confederacy and the Puritans reached the breaking point in the spring of 1675, when an Indian, John Sassamon, was found murdered after telling Plymouth colony officials that Metacom, now called King Philip by the Puritans, was trying to arrange Indian attacks on far-flung settlements. Colonial officials arrested 3 Wampanoags, including a counselor of Metacom, convicted them of John Sassamon's murder, and hanged them. In response, a band of Indians destroyed Swansea, a small Plymouth colony settlement, killing several settlers. The war was on in earnest. Metacom proved an able war leader. Using guerrilla-style tactics, he and his warriors led lightning-swift attacks against outlying communities, among them Middleborough, Dartmouth, Deerfield, Hadley, and Northfield. A colonial militia, which had set out to destroy Indian fields, was ambushed and defeated in the Battle of Bloody Brook in October 1675. Throughout the winter of 1675 to 1676, more frontier settlements were destroyed by the Indians. The spring of 1676 was the high point of the Wampanoags' War. Metacom's warriors attacked the heart of the colony at Plymouth Plantation itself. Plymouth barely held off the attack. Later, Providence, Rhode Island was burned, and so was part of Springfield, Massachusetts. Captain Pierce and a company of Massachusetts soldiers were wiped out. Driven back into their larger towns, the Puritans were on the brink of having to admit defeat and surrender. Then an able Puritan militiaman adopted Metacom's own tactics. Captain Benjamin Church selected the best militiamen and forged them into a ranger company. He led these men on fast-moving raids deep into the Wampanoag territory, where they destroyed Indian villages and food stockpiles. At the same time, Puritan leaders forged alliances with the Mohegan and Pequot tribes, who then attacked Metacom's forces. With their supplies running out and no help from any allies, Metacom and the Wampanoags faced certain defeat. On August 12, 1676, Metacom was killed on Mount Hope in Bristol, Rhode Island, by an Indian named John Alderman. The war ended very quickly after Metacom's death. Nearly 1,000 colonists died, and 3 times that many Indians were killed or sold into slavery. As a result, the coastal Indians would never again be able to contain the English colonists, who would continue to spread out across the lush valleys of New England. Metacom began a long tradition of American Indian leaders trying to thwart expansion. For the next 200 years, men such as Pontiac, Tecumseh, Black Hawk, Geronimo, Red Cloud, and Sitting Bull would lead valiant attempts to stop the advance of whites into Indian lands.